Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. This is okay. Wait, that's better. Welcome to another episode of the All Words Are Free podcast. So the sun is shining, the vibes are vibing, and I feel pretty ready to talk about conservatism. So there's been a lot of discourse online about this recently, like the rise of conservatism in our culture and the kind of pendulum swing from the conservative to the liberal, kind of going back the other way, as tends to be the kind of form of trends and also politics in general. Um, so we're going to be getting into all that today. So a lot of the content in this video is mainly inspired by Khadija Bo's video, and the link to that is below. So I guess, kind of without further ado, let's just dive in. So, focusing particularly on the kind of religious aspect of this, there seems to have been a big rise in people committing to religion recently, both like online and in offline spheres as well. So, this seems to almost be the converse of what we've previously seen, or what is the kind of expected way that things go. So, the younger generations wandering away from religion and the traditions with which they maybe grew up, or also that their parents kind of adhered to. So perhaps this is wrapped up in this kind of liberalism, or more exactly, the kind of widening of societal values and acceptance. So time has opened eyes and opened doors, and while we're still far from perfect, time has kind of allowed us to begin to draw a correlation perhaps between liberalism and then this kind of decline in being quite highly religious. We do have a much more secular society than we used to have, for example. So religion is traditionally seen as quite restrictive and exclusive, and this isn't to say that, all people with religion hold prejudiced beliefs or anything like that, but rather to state that the kind of general image of religion, due to like historical and also some contemporary holdings of religion in certain circumstances and places, is linked to this kind of conservative, much more exclusive, barrier kind of way of getting into religion or being truly religious, quote unquote. So religion is wrapped up with the concept of conservatism, and so pitted against this more kind of liberal leaning politics and social cues. But conservatism as a whole is getting a refresh. She's getting a rebrand. Here in my little like conservative vibe summer dress kind of thing. So in the natural kind of pendulum swing of belief systems due to an ever strenuous world stage, liberal is out and conservatives in. So this has been seen kind of throughout history, and even though we've seemed quite liberal for a while in the kind of trendiest way to be kind of sense. You see that most people online are like liberal, and everyone, for example, was like making their stories black for Black Lives Matter and all this sort of thing. And we'll come on to the kind of temporal sense of that shortly. It still follows this clear trend. So, kind of we first got the clean girl. That was step one. And then it was kind of this old money style, beige, white, colour palette vibe. And now everyone's leaning more religious. And by everyone, I mean your popular figures, your influencers, your celebrities. The swing can be seen most clearly in these kind of very visible spheres. And this obviously adds an element of privilege then to this ability to be flexible with your stance on issues. I think it also adds a kind of artificiality to the subject as well. So, was the them of 10 years ago, for example, when they were making their stories black for Black Lives Matter, the real them? Or is this version now, where they're very highly devout and religious, actually the truth? It all comes back to this marketability question. So in order to retain popularity on social media or as a celebrity, you have to swing with the trends. So particularly when you're starting out. So there is license to do your own thing in some part, considering, for example, music in particular. But it does then make it that much harder to be discovered. So even in the commentary space, for example, to have your audio or video seen, it has to play to the algorithm. Hence, realistically, why I'm delving into this conversation today. So now a surge in religion is being taken as the kind of next great marketing tool. So in their video, Khadija Bo raises the case of the Gwen Stefani kind of backed prayer app. And the fact that it's a prayer app, it feels quite existential. But to me, it does feel like a kind of cash grab when faces are put to products that then feed on people's most central beliefs. And in this way, religion may be picked up falsely. The very nature of trends means that, people gravitate toward the latest craze in order to feel part of a community or the zeitgeist, to be in the know. And interestingly, this correlates somewhat with how we consider religion in its most communal sense. Nevertheless, if treated as a trend rather than a lifestyle, people hopping onto the, say, religion bandwagon feels quite insincere and even capitalist, gaining visibility and, in some cases, financially from appearing, quote unquote, devout. So people are making broad strokes, getting publicly streamed baptisms and tattoo removals and all these kind of very sensational things. And while some of this may be sincere, and I don't doubt that it is in some cases, the copied nature of the behaviours, we're seeing similar things again and again, it kind of rings a little untrue. So religion may also be fostered as a morality tool. As in my previous essay on kind of class and being working class in particular, there is something in bolstering one's image by associating with something deemed either good or moral. So intriguingly, all of this discourse about the moment on like religion, the rise in religion, and even this kind of trad wife kind of stuff, it's all very Christian. And Christianity, in its broadest sense, has had a murky relationship with the kind of base definition of what we would think of goodness. But in amongst the recent death of the Pope, for example, and the secularized ideals of good and evil, the tradwife role fulfillment of it all, Christianity has almost been gifted this rebrand, if only on its very surface and artificial and social media glossed level. By linking oneself to it, then you are automatically seen as superior to those who are not religious or those who do not understand it, do not try to understand it, or betray themselves to the sins of the world from the perspective of the people who've kind of adopted the religion, perhaps. The pushing of religion onto others in this kind of very comparative, superiority, hierarchical, complex way is a great pitfall of our social structures in general. And yet, even if this kind of belief of superiority is subconscious, there is this association of religion with conservatism, and therefore there's comfort and gain in a kind of capitalistic driven world where like ownership and money is valued beyond everything else and other things, whether that be the worldly truth or the aspect that we are presented with. There's also this image of inner peace, which, again, in this kind of wellness sphere, which is still very much present, if not as big of a craze as it was maybe even 5 years ago, this idea of like achieving one's inner peace and being relaxed and even self-care now comes alongside this package of supremacy, this package of better than thou kind of thing. And the original motivations of things are lost within that. And I think even religion can suffer from that in this very kind of capitalist, hierarchical um, image of how it is portrayed in social media. So this inner peace kind of idea, again, while perhaps not true for everyone, there's always exceptions. I think on social media, things can get lumped together quite often when people who are actually, quite devout and just want to share their experiences of being religious, and they may get lumped in with people who are kind of using it as a more of an image thing, and you can't always maybe tell the difference or delineate between these groups. And so I think there's danger at taking things at face value, changing your own kind of activities or behaviors or beliefs due to, say, an influencer's video or anything like that, or what seems to be a trend. But I don't think you can sweep everyone with the same brush and say that everyone is insincere. I think that's very much, it's about you looking in on yourself and seeing what is right for you. Nevertheless, we do hear often of people who have, say, risen from the darkest times in their lives by finding religion, and this is not a bad thing at all. It's just not for everyone, and we should remain aware of that. Religion is complex and intertwined into our society like any other hierarchical structure. But what does this resurgence say in the younger generations say about the state of the world? So cases of mental health conditions and general kind of despondency is high in Gen Z, and so it's natural to seek solace, comfort, and release. And not everyone does kind of go the way of religion and meditation and things like that, spirituality, but rather, as Khadija points out in their video, others may slide to this kind of other end of the scale, taking drugs or alcohol or partying or anything kind of along those lines. Others may dive into their work or their relationships, and people cope with things in very different ways. But there's also a lot of, and as I've hinted to before, a lot of this kind of religious adjacent behaviour rising up in popular culture as well and amongst Gen Z. So, for example, sobriety and celibacy. So, this comes alongside the question of whether these kind of things that we're seeing are trends or whether it's based on people's principles and maybe they've shifted. For example, are people not drinking for kind of health reasons, or not drinking because their friends aren't or people online aren't. And on the health side, does this lean into that kind of clean girl, no alcohol because it causes weight gain mentality? Or is it more about how you feel? And I think that, either of those things, perhaps one is more based in being at one with the self, which is more akin to spirituality than a kind of aesthetic, personal gain visibly, and that visibility kind of vibe, the exclusive view. How does that lie in there? And there is a good side to this. I mean, namely, in my own experience, it's good to see the kind of reduction in peer pressure around drinking, especially, and also other recreational per se activities. So even at things like evening events, and that I've been to myself, people aren't pushed into drinking. People actually like repeatedly say that, oh, you don't have to drink if there's a drinking game, even if people have drunk before or like 5 minutes sooner. There's still that kind of leeway per se of being able to just say like, no, I don't want to, and that's okay. No one is turning their nose up when someone gets a soft drink or says no. And this may kind of remind one of the whole like designated driver kind of situation without the car part. But since no one can get lessons or book a test, it's a bit more of personal choice. So is all of this the fallout from COVID? It had to happen. She's back. The COVID is back. She's back on the discourse train. And I think, this is interesting and perhaps key to consider, right? So this conservative shift has aligned with lockdowns and the subsequent reopening of public spaces. It strikes me how separate that time of like lockdowns and everything feels from right now, and how differently it affected people from all over the globe. It's not surprising, perhaps, that people are seeking out stability in such times, and the tougher lines of conservatism, or the kind of stricter set of rules per se of conservatism, and then this promise of spiritual or financial stability, aligned with that, adds more reason to our kind of current pendulum swing. It gives a kind of explanation for why things might have swung the other way. So another shift in youth culture is this uptake in celibacy. So in contrast to that kind of sex liberation of the 2010s, the current movement into more conservative views of relationships with our bodies as well as with other people is akin to the kind of 1970s feminist movement. Abstinence was held as a feminist act. Now, obviously, I'm coming at this from a very uh, female, women kind of oriented perspective. And celibacy isn't just restricted to people perceived as female, or people who identify as female at all. It spans everybody. Um, and the rise in celibacy is spanning all across youth culture, actually. Now, neither this, so celibacy, or sobriety talk is to say that these things don't still occur as well. Of course they do. People have casual sex, people drink and go out drinking and all of that jazz. I'm literally a university student. But rather the perception of, or the kind of social media portrayal of celibacy or sobriety is the key. And also linked up in this kind of untruth of it all, whether people are genuinely like this or whether this is just what they want to portray to kind of give this holier than thou image. There are further layers to the celibacy question, and I won't spend too long on this. But on a conservative slant, we may argue that it's kind of a preservation for commitment, body as a temple, care and health, self-understanding kind of idea. And from a liberal standpoint, it may be seen from a more feminist perspective, so a reaction to the conflict between selfhood and a rise in misogynistic rhetoric. But is celibacy anti-female exploration, or is it taking back from the men, from the whole kind of sex liberation kind of movement? Is it a personal choice for one in their body, an individual decision, and not a political statement? And I think that this is quite a key thing to remember when we're discussing kind of any of this. Are people doing things for image? Are people doing things to make a statement? Or are people doing things because it feels right for them? Another part of this kind of whole swing to conservatism topic that I thought intriguing to consider is who is actually acting this way. So we've covered the influencers, the celebrities, but on a kind of average Joe level, a lot of these activities have been correlated with Gen Z, right? Which would make sense given our high consumption of media, but a lot of the faces of this movement are actually millennials or people who are in older generations, suggesting that perhaps this is more linked to age and maturity than it seems. So as one gets older, typically it's common to mellow. maybe. So this is different for different people, of course. It doesn't necessarily suggest a call to religion, but rather circumstances may change for people. So having children, working in more stable careers, buying a house. Yeah. But all in all, the kind of the partying and this volatility tends to stop or at least tone down, which at least correlates with the decrease in drinking and casual sex. It's also worth noting that the influences of the 2010s are now 10 years older when we kind of look at them now and see what the biggest trends are, and this may just correlate with them maturing. I think also with the whole bandwagon idea, there is an element of kind of being part of the club. And if something seems popular, then more and more people jump on it to get visibility for the algorithm, etc. And so this is really one of the core drivers of trends in the first place. So is this why we're seeing a lot of people turn to conservatism, or at least appear to turn to conservatism? I also think another kind of important aspect to consider of this is how conservatism and how it's kind of perceived, but religion in particular, how that links to people's social and political views. So, can we confidently, 100%, link one's social views with their relationship with religion? I don't really think we can. And I think to assume one is, for example, politically very conservative just because they are religious is an oversimplification. This isn't to deny that there are trends and that one is shaped deeply by their beliefs and where they find themselves while having these beliefs. But I think that it is perhaps naive to assume somebody's beliefs just because assume somebody's social political beliefs just because of their religion. One element of this where I am more kind of making a statement than proposing things is in the forcing of others into or out of their religion. I think everyone should be able to carry their own beliefs without being ridiculed for what they follow, within reason. Extremism is another question, and extremism aside. But it feels as if we are in constant battle with each other, just generally, we being a generic kind of human race sense. And while one may not have the same religious beliefs or political leanings or opinions on certain, that sounds so weird, sorry, on certain topics as somebody else, I don't think that means that their relationship is fractious on all levels. I think it's important to find commonalities when engaging in discourse, even if that is simply just a state of being human. And this can't, it's naive to think this necessarily apply in all cases. But I do think that perhaps we could widen our spheres of conversation a little more. So, within all this and my quick whistle stop tour of the rise in conservatism, what's may mean, and little subtopics, what are my beliefs? So, my parents aren't religious, which, since our kind of upbringing shapes us in some ways, it got me off to this kind of ambiguous start. So, for us, it's always been about what the others want or need for themselves, right? So, I think belief systems wouldn't be forced, for example. My grandpa was an atheist, and my grandma is kind of more agnostic, I suppose. And I did go to a primary school that was largely kind of centralized in Christianity. It wasn't a religious school, but we did have like services and assembly and like Lord's Prayer kind of vibe. Went to the local Methodist church for like Christmas kind of choir things. I sung in the choir. And I remember liking these kind of special services, like the Christmas one. And I remember also my mum saying how it felt kind of comforting. I think, one can see why people love it so. There is that real sense of community, especially if you're feeling insecure or a little lost. And I also went to the weekly youth club at this Methodist church, and besides being surrounded by the kind of religious iconography, it wasn't a like religiously charged gathering, which again I think was nice because they hosted the children, they weren't enforcing religion onto them, and Christianity at that. At one time, I did start praying before I went to sleep, because I liked that feeling of like togetherness and of acceptance. I think, which I couldn't articulate at the time, but kind of felt nonetheless when I look back. I don't know how long that lasted, but it did diminish because I don't still do it now. And so here I am. So I'm not adverse to religion at all, and I'm very much in the people should have the license to believe what they believe and not be ridiculed for it camp. I'm also not against returning to it in the future if that feels right to me, and I don't think falling off and going back or suddenly finding religion is an absurd thing. So currently, I'm quite a-religious. I don't practice. I don't believe real in anything. I don't feel as if I'm missing something though. I think overall, I'm very contented in my life and its path in that kind of spiritual sense. I think something that Khadija raised, which was nice, was the idea of believing in something, or rather, like, what is it that you can rely on when everything seems quite dire? For me, I think it's very much that kind of sense of self and comfort in what I'm doing and how I'm feeling, and then the people around me. I think the most cathartic of experiences for me is when I tune in. So whether it's a yoga session or a run, whether it's nature, and this all sounds very stereotypical and woo-woo maybe. Um, but despite the social media of it all and this kind of, image of social media and its falsities, I think that there is value in these things. There is value in like some wellness stuff and everything. I think that, the core beliefs are there for a reason. I think sometimes it can be exploited for a market or for visibility. And there's something about the latter, especially, so nature, that makes me feel incredibly at peace. And I don't want to like label myself in any way as like spiritual or da 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 or whatever, because I find that quite restrictive. Um, and perhaps as a scientist and a writer, I am built to believe in life. Um, and they're kind of my thoughts. When I wrote this out as a script, it came out quite easily. I mean, I just kind of watched Khadijah's video, so the ideas were all there and flowing. But it came quite easily. And I think that, there's a few little bitty points kind of thing. Um, but I'd love to hear what you guys think. Whether, is conservatism taking over? Are the liberals dying out? And etc. I think this is obviously from a perception of kind of modern times, but I don't know whether the pendulum swing is as severe as it previously was. Although, you could say that, well, there's always going to be conservatives and liberals about at the same time because not everybody is going to swing like constantly. I mean, people live through these changes, right? So they're not going to have their fundamental beliefs kind of switched just like that, just like magic. But I'm still, if I was to class myself in a camp, I'm still very much a liberal, and that isn't going to change. I just think it interesting to see kind of how the kind of trendification of these things, of liberalism and conservatism, particularly in that kind of influencer, very online sphere. But please do let me know what you think and whether you think conservatism is truly on the rise. With everything that's been going on in the world, politically, there's certainly a certain atmosphere going. But thank you all for listening and or watching. I've loved how the sun has just kind of, flown across my camera right there. I hope this isn't too offensive to the eyes, too bright. But yeah, thank you all again so much for listening. I hope to see you back here soon. Take care and let's keep talking.